For further analysis of today's launch attempt of KSLV-II Nuri, I'm joined by Professor Shin Dong-hyuk from KAIST and Dr. Sonya Seokhee Lim, Principal Researcher at the Korea Aerospace Research Institute. Thank you both for coming on.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Professor Shin, I want to start with you. So the launch was put on hold just 2 hours before the liftoff. So what happened there? So what were the problems?
So it was quite unfortunate news, but this is how the space industry works, and then this is quite common in many launch systems, including Korea and then US as well. So if you remember back the second launch of Nuri, it was delayed almost by a week, and then before that it was delayed by an hour. So I think what we need to do is just be more patient and then wait for the actual announcement. So in the meantime, it was announced that there's a problem of the communication between control computer, which is not actually part of the launch itself. It may be related to the control system. So it was thought that they will be able to fix while the launch itself is still on the launch pad. So also, this communication computer is a part of the pre-launch operation system, so something called the automatic system. So if this does not work, I mean, the automatic system will cancel the launch in the last minute as well. So it needs to be fixed as well. Yeah.
And Professor, so when we still have to wait and see, but when are we expecting another launch attempt?
So it's always difficult. So whenever there is a problem, people like to know when it's the next time. But I guess as an engineer, they will be very hard to working to figure out what's the problem and then how to fix it. So it was announced that the earliest possible time will be, it will be decided by tomorrow morning. And then hopefully we can see the launch again tomorrow. However, there is a reserve date until Wednesday next week, so May 31st. So there's a potential possibility then the launch will be happening next week as well.
And Dr. Lim, you took part in the development of KSLV-I Naro and KSLV-II Nuri. So do tell us more what it was like.
I think that I can say like that. We had teachers at the time in Naro development, such as Russian specialists. But by the way, we should build and launch it in this time. So I feel that it is very similar to starting my life independent from my parents. So I can say that we were learning and following the instruction at that time. But during the Nuri development, we should make by ourselves, and we break through our barriers, solving the problems by ourselves. So it was a little bit confused in the beginning, but anyway, we finally took the step by step with our experience. And the first step was 2 years ago for the first launch, and the second step was the last year. And today, finally, I feel that we are standing on both feet like that. But unfortunately, we should waiting for tomorrow.
Fingers crossed and making history. And Professor Shin, so what was different this time compared to the previous 2 test launches?
So I can say that the launch hardware itself is quite same as the previous one, but the mission and the payload are quite different. And then this is some exciting point about this third launch. So if you remember the last launch, they had some validation satellite, which is simply putting there and then say that I'm okay. But this time we have an actual practical A satellite on board. So that's the main difference. And then another difference is that because we have a practical satellite, so it has a specific orbit target as well. So previous launch was targeting 700 kilometers, and then this time they are aiming to reach the 550 kilometers. And then the next one is industry participation. So last year, October, Korea Aerospace was chosen to take over the KARI technology. So this time around 10 people will be in the mission control center, and then they'll be observing how the KARI people operating, and then they will start to observe all the technology from KARI.
That was a nice roundup. And Dr. Lim, Nuri was supposed to be launched at 6:24 p.m. That is about 2 hours later than the previous launch. Why was that? And how does the dawn-dusk orbit work?
So let's say at first about the dawn-dusk orbit. The satellite from the Naro Space Center usually they are launched to the south direction. So it goes around the Earth in the south-north direction. At this time, maintaining the constant angle with the sun is very important, and we call it solar synchronous orbit, SSO. And when this angle is 90 degrees, we call it dawn-dusk orbit, especially because the satellites in dawn-dusk orbit literally moves along the lines where sunrise or sunset. In that case, the satellite has charged the possibility of the charging the electricity always. So the next set, the 2, is it can be considered as a main customer of this launch, and they have a component which consumes electricity very well. So the customer, they require that kind of the orbit to insert. And I can say that it is very important things for Nuri launch vehicle to listen to the voice of the customer and provide that kind of the service.
And Professor Shin, Nuri was supposed to carry, you mentioned this a little bit earlier, but 8 practical satellites, this time including South Korea's second next generation small satellite 2 and 4 SNIPE satellites. So what missions are they set to carry out?
Yes, so this is the exciting moment. So they have actually the practical 3 set of satellites. As you mentioned, there is a next gen 2, NextSat 2, and then SNIPE, and then some small CubeSat. So NextSat 2 has a 6 payload on board. The most important payload is something called the SAR, which was mentioned earlier. So it's a homemade synthetic aperture radar. And then the main advantage is that you can monitor the Earth even in a very cloud situation or at night. And then it will help to monitor ice in Arctic, forest monitoring, and then marine pollution as well. And you also carry the Leo dose, which will detect cosmic radiation. And then there are 5 other homemade devices as well. So they are the phase change material for thermal control, expand power amplifier, and GPS, the dual receiver, and solar panel. I think that one of the most important things is the satellite carry the homemade, and then we can actually test if it's working in the space as well. And then this is very important to make a future satellite, and then we can able to sell to the foreign country as well. And then in that sense, we have 3 more CubeSat, Lumir T1, and then Jack, and then KSLV-III, and then each of them carry their own developed space product, which is a microprocessor board, and then the space camera, and then polarization, and then the orbit system. So I'm quite excited to see that kind of we are able to have our country has a space company, and then we can test in space. And the last one is SNIPE. So SNIPE has a little bit of story about the launch. So it's supposed to be carried by a Russian rocket, but because of the circumstance, so it cannot can deliver by the Russian rocket, which was initially scheduled by last year. So luckily we have a Nuriho, and then it has some free space. So why not? I mean, taking an additional payload on board. So SNIPE will be there. 4 satellites, which is a kind of set of the satellite, and then they will fly information. So they can fly in a row, or they fly in a side by side. And then why it's important? Because each different location, they may have a different kind of magnetic field around the Earth, and then it can detect the local variation by having the 4 satellites flying all together. So it's quite exciting to see all of them.
I would say they really have an important mission. And Dr. Lim, how heavy is the payload this time? Last time, Nuri carried a dummy satellite weighing over a ton for test launch.
Yeah, so the next set, number 2, is 180 kilograms. And the other satellites, CubeSats, they ranges from 3 kilograms to 10 kilograms, like that. So, and also there is a deployer. It is similar to the car seat for us. So it makes the satellites for safety. It weighs about more than 250 kilograms. So totally, the sum is the 504 kilograms today. But the Nuri, the second launch, we delivered 1.5 tons to the 8 kilometer SSO. But the third launch in this time, it delivers just to half tons to the SSO, 550 kilometers. So in this case, it is the more light, and also we are less moving. So the operating time of the third stage engine is about 90 seconds shorter than before. From 783 seconds, 8 satellites enters to the orbit at the 20 seconds interval.
And Professor Shin, Hanwha Aerospace was overseeing the project for the first time. You mentioned this a little bit earlier, and it's the first private company participation, and Hanwha will be in charge for the years to come. So what do you say on South Korea's space era, led by the private sector?
So we call the current era as a new space, and then what it means is that the space industry will be led by private sectors. And then so far, it's more the government or the KARI which was leading the space development. So it was a very good move for that the knowledge will be transferred to the private sector. And then there are 3 more, after this launch, there will be 3 more launch planned about the Nuri. And then the scope of participation from HANA will be increasing. So at this moment, around 10 people will be kind of they will be observing what is done. And then as we move to next launch, for example, the next one will be 2025, and then 2026, and 7, and so forth. And then more HANA industrial people will be participating. And then also, apart from HANA, there's also 2 startup companies in terms of the small space launcher, which is Perigi and the InnoSpace. And actually, the InnoSpace made a successful maiden launch last year in Brazil. So I think there's a very bright future in Korean private sector in space as well.
More to expect.
Yeah.
And now we connect with Professor Wendy Whitman-Cobb at U.S. School of Advanced Air and Space Studies, who joins us live from Alabama. Professor, thank you for your time. It must be very early in the morning.
It is, but thank you for having me.
Thank you. And first of all, so what are your thoughts on today's launch attempt? The KSLV-II Nuri launch was put on hold just 2 hours before the plant blast off.
Very normal to happen with space launches. And it's always better to catch these problems on the ground. That is why there's a countdown to identify any potential problems with launch before you actually get to space. It's very normal. In fact, SpaceX launched just a few hours ago after delaying for a little bit due to some technical glitches. They eventually had to stand down for weather, but this is something that is not out of the normal. In fact, it's actually rather rare to get a rocket up on its first scheduled launch attempt. So I think this is good. It means people are paying attention, and they won't launch until they're absolutely ready.
All right. And over in the U.S., SpaceX and Blue Origin are among the leading players in space exploration. So where does private sector space business stand today?
It's really becoming the dominating factor in space today. And this is a relatively new phenomenon. For most of the space era, activity in space has been dominated by governments who have been the ones who have the most money, the most resources to devote to these things. So it's only been relatively recently where this has been a really driving factor. But it's really becoming the major factor now today. In fact, a lot of what NASA is doing in low Earth orbit is on the backs of companies like SpaceX. And SpaceX just set up a private astronaut crew to the International Space Station just a few days ago. So this is very much a sea change, and I think a good one. It helps to bring down costs so that we can be doing more things in space. Advances our technology so we can get further out into space, and really is enabling a lot of our future plans, not just in the United States, but around the world.
And Professor, how far have the US, Russia, or other major players come in terms of space rocket development?
You know, we've come really far, but what I think is really interesting, at least to me, is that our basic technology to get to space hasn't changed very much since the 1950s. We're still using largely liquid-fueled rockets. Sometimes we use solid-fueled. The space shuttle had 2 solid rocket boosters on its stack. But for the most part, we're using the same type of technology. What's changed more recently is the reusability factor, being able to recover and then reuse rockets and stages, and that really brings down the cost. So we've come far. We've come really far in terms of heavy launch, where we can get heavier payloads further out into space. And that's something that will really enable lunar exploration in the coming years, especially in terms of something like SpaceX's Starship. And so, we've come far. We've gotten more into space than ever before and more frequently, but we're still using relatively the same types of technology that we have for many decades now.
And Professor, I want to ask you, where does the KSLV-II stand when compared to other space development systems around the world?
Nuri is more of a smaller launch platform to support smaller payloads. It can only get about 1.5 tons into space, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. A lot of the rockets that are on the market today are relatively about Falcon 9 size, so that's a little bit larger of a launch system. And so not every satellite needs to go up on a Falcon 9 or a heavy launch vehicle. We need smaller launch vehicles to be able to enable some of these smaller satellite payloads like this third launch will be taking up. So, it will occupy in the coming years a really interesting part of the market that should enable smaller satellites to go into space more frequently at a much lower cost, even compared to SpaceX's Falcon 9.
All right, and cooperation is underway between South Korea and the United States under the Artemis Agreement for the Moon project. What's the latest and how do you see this progressing?
Lots of really exciting things going on with Artemis in the near future. South Korea and the United States have recently signed several agreements to expand cooperation. In addition to a South Korean lunar satellite that is currently flying around the moon now, South Korea is looking at a lunar rover in the near future, and as well as some additional technologies that may enable mineral and resource exploitation on the moon. We don't necessarily know entirely what we might be able to take advantage of in terms of resources on the moon, and so in the coming years, there'll be a lot of cooperation between the United States, South Korea, and other countries to really find out a lot more about the moon and how that might benefit us. And so I think both countries are really looking forward to an extended amount of cooperation in Artemis and other areas of space exploration that will really enable both countries to take advantage of the unique capabilities that the other offers. Not every country can do it all on their own, not just in terms of cost, but also in terms of technology. So it's really important for countries to provide their unique capabilities to enable cooperation and benefits for humanity as a whole.
Looking forward to it. All right, Professor Wendy Whitman-Koff, many thanks for your insights.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Dr. Lim, I want to pick up where we have left off. So how far have we come from the launch of Naro KSLV-I and Nuri KSLV-II?
So I can say like that, the mission of the Nuri is to put the 1.5 ton to the 700 kilometer SSO, and Naro was to send just 1 kilogram to the 300 kilometer LEO, low Earth orbit. Yeah. So therefore, Nuri is the delivery capability is bigger or better than Naro. However, Naro used the latest Russian engine. It is a so nice one. So we also have tried to do, but it is not yet able to make such kind of the engine. Comparing this kind of the two launch vehicle, the Nuri is a space vehicle with a low with a low fuel economy, efficiency, but it is a large displacement in engine in a car. So it is a kind of the metaphor. So anyway, in case the Nuri is a less efficiency than the Naro, but it can send more and farther.
All right, and Professor Shin, and where do we go from here? What are South Korea's space exploration plans for the years to come?
So in terms of the space launcher itself, as I mentioned, there will be 3 more attempts in terms of the Nuri launch. And then there is a next generation space launcher development underway. So it will be more powerful, and then ultimately it can carry a payload to the moon orbit by ourselves. And also government set out some very ambitious plans. So by 2032, so we plan to deploy moon lander and then also by 2040, we want to establish a colony on moon as well. And then by 2035, we want to send the orbiter on Mars. And then by 2045, we want to land on Mars. So it's quite ambitious plan. And then in order to achieve this, we also need to have a launcher accordingly. However, this is something set by the government. And then we cannot really control the private sector. And I think it's important that private sector can come up with a new idea, and then having more startups, and then also private company, they need to make a profit out of this. So, and then ultimately, if they make a profit, it will be good for our economy as well. So hopefully, from both the government side and then private sector, they both grow all together. Yeah.
And as a follow-up on that, what are future Nuri launch plans up until 2027?
So there are 3 more launch plans. So in 2025, and then 2026, and then 2027. So you may wonder why 2 years later, because it will take some time for the Hana Aerospace to take over some portion of the technology. So the next launch will be in 2 years, and then 1 year after that.
And there are more launches planned between now and 2027, as you said. So why are we just sending rockets into space over and over again?
I think there can be two perspectives. So the first one, in terms of Nuri, we have to prove reliability. So right now we carry our homegrown satellite, which was funded by government, and then we also have some CubeSat. But it's not a sustainable way. So we need to make a profit out of that. And then we need to have a potential customer. And then customer, they want to have a reliability. So we have successful launch in the second attempt, but however, it's not enough. So for example, if you look at other launcher, they have some successful launch in the first and second time, but fail again in the third attempt. So that's why we have to launch multiple times and then prove the reliability. And then they can be kind of good reason for the customer to use our Nuri launcher. And also another perspective is a knowledge transfer. So right now, it was solely by the KARI people, Korean Aerospace Research Institute. However, all the knowledge should be transferred to Hana Industry and then Hana Aerospace, and then it does not happen over one single year. For example, it takes 10 years to develop Nuri, so we expect that similar amount of time will be required. So by doing the same practice and again, so Hana Aerospace will take over all the technology. Also, the launch system, so there's a room to be optimized. So in doing so, it may look identical, but internally there are some changes in the operation itself. So it's important to do the repetition as well.
I see. And Dr. Lim, so what can you tell us about the significance of this launch attempt in terms of Korea's space development?
I think that the first attempt is a kind of the practice to check our lift itself. And the second attempt was also the practice to put the orbit into the orbit, the satellite into the orbit. And now we listen to the customer. So I think that it is very significant that we are ready to, it seems ready to give some launch service from the third attempt.
Yeah, that's right. And Professor Shin, how has South Korea has mapped out its own plan to build the Korean version of NASA. So bring us up to speed on this issue and what are the prospects?
So I think it's quite important as well. So right now, the space is managed by multiple ministries. For example, Minister of Science is kind of handling this Nuri development. And then there is a Minister of Land, which actually deployed the Korean GPS system. And then there is a air defense, defense system, which kind of also developing its own rocket. So right now, things are scattered around, and then space technology quite, special, and then we need the experts. So that's why we need having a ministry or the government body which focus on space. So I can also say this way. So our territory, we have a land. So we have that's why we have a Minister of Land. We have ocean, so that's why we have a Minister of Ocean. Now we have something above us, so we have sky and space, so we need to have a kind of equivalent body of space and sky as well.
All right, Dr. Lim and Professor Shin, many thanks for your insights.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.